My name is Duke Sullivan, and this happened to me in the summer of 1995. I was a truck driver, hauling freight across the Midwest, mostly small towns and back roads. It was a good job for a guy like me. Kept me on the move, no bosses breathing down my neck, and plenty of time to think. I was 35 back then, a bit rough around the edges, but enjoying life. Little did I know that summer would change everything. I had just picked up a load in Elkhart, Indiana, and was headed to a small town in Missouri. It was a hot day, the kind where sweat sticks to your back and the sun glares off the asphalt like it's got a personal grudge. I remember stopping at a small diner just off Highway 50 to grab a quick bite. There was nothing special about the place, just greasy food and bad coffee, but it did the trick. The waitress, a young woman named Jenny, was chatty. She asked me about my route, my truck, the usual small-town curiosity. She mentioned something about a missing girl from a nearby town and said her picture was on the news. I nodded, half listening, more focused on my burger. People go missing all the time, right? I didn't think much of it. After finishing up, I got back on the road, pushing through the afternoon heat. About an hour in, my CB radio crackled to life. It was another driver, Joe, who I'd run into a few times at various stops. Joe was one of those guys who always had a story, usually too good to be true, but he was good company on the long hauls. "Hey Duke, you out there?" Joe's voice came through the static. "Yeah, I'm here." "What's up, Joe?" I replied, adjusting the volume. "You hear about that girl? The one from Sterling? Word is they found her car, but not her. Weird stuff, man. Real weird." "Yeah, some waitress was talking about it." I said, "What do you think happened?" "Could be anything. Runaway maybe. Or something worse. You know how it is." I didn't say much more. Just listened to Joe ramble on about other missing person cases he'd heard of. By the time I rolled into Sterling, the sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows over the town. It was a quiet place, one of those towns where everyone knows everyone else and strangers stick out like a sore thumb. I pulled into a rest area just outside of town, figuring I'd catch a few hours of sleep before heading out early in the morning. The place was empty except for a couple of parked cars. I climbed into my sleeper cab, cracked the window to let in some air, and settled in for the night. I must have dozed off pretty quickly because the next thing I knew, there was a tapping on my window. Groggy, I rubbed my eyes and peered out. Standing there was a middle-aged man, scruffy, with a worn-out baseball cap. He looked desperate, his eyes darting around nervously. "Hey buddy, you got a minute?" he asked, his voice shaky. I rolled down the window a bit more. "What's going on?" "My daughter, she's missing." "You a trucker? You see a girl, maybe 16, brown hair, blue eyes?" "Her name's Emily." It hit me then. This was the missing girl Jenny and Joe had mentioned. I shook my head. "Sorry, man. I haven't seen anyone." "When did she go missing?" "A couple of days ago. We found her car by the old quarry, but no sign of her. Please, if you see anything, let us know." I nodded, giving him my best reassuring look. He handed me a flyer with her picture and some contact information. I took it, feeling a pang of sympathy. Losing a kid must be the worst thing imaginable. He thanked me and walked off into the night. I couldn't sleep after that. Something about his desperation got under my skin. I started thinking about my own life, the people I'd lost touch with, the roads I'd traveled. I decided to take a look around the quarry in the morning just to see if there was anything out of place. Not that I expected to find anything. What did I know about finding missing people? Morning came, and I headed out to the quarry. It was an old abandoned site, overgrown with weeds and littered with broken equipment. I parked the truck and started walking, looking for any signs of the girl. I didn't know what I was looking for, maybe a piece of clothing, a bag, anything that might help. I was about to give up when I saw it. A small, worn-out sneaker, partially hidden under some bushes. My heart skipped a beat. I crouched down, picking it up carefully. It was dirty, like it had been out here for a while. I looked around, suddenly feeling very alone. Then I saw him, a man, tall and lanky, standing on the ridge above me. He was watching me, his face unreadable. I raised my hand in a half wave, trying to act casual, but my mind was racing. Something about him felt off. He didn't wave back. Instead, he turned and disappeared over the ridge. I quickly stuffed the sneaker into my jacket and made my way back to the truck. As I started the engine, my mind was buzzing. Who was that guy? What was he doing out here? And most importantly, was Emily still alive? I drove back to town, stopping at the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a grizzled old man named Harris, listened patiently as I told him about the sneaker and the man I'd seen. "You sure about this?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "Yeah, I'm sure. Look, I know it's not much, but maybe it's something." He sighed, taking the sneaker from me. "All right, I'll send someone out to check it. In the meantime, you keep your eyes open and be careful, Duke. This ain't the kind of place where people go missing." I nodded and left, feeling a mix of frustration and unease. I got back in my truck, ready to leave this place behind, but as I drove out of town, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next couple of days were uneventful. I made my deliveries, chatted with other drivers, and tried to put Sterling out of my mind. But every time I stopped, I found myself checking the news for updates on Emily. It was late one night, somewhere in Missouri, when I got a call from Joe on the CB. "Duke, you got a minute?" "Yeah, what's up?" Sheriff Harris called. Said they found more evidence near that quarry. Some blood, looks like. And they're still looking for that guy you saw. Damn. You think they'll find her? I hope so. But listen, there's something else. A buddy of mine, Frank, he was in Sterling yesterday. He said he saw a guy matching your description hanging around the truck stop there. Creepy as hell. I felt a chill run down my spine. You think he's following us? Could be. Just keep your eyes open, all right? I thanked Joe and signed off, feeling a new sense of unease. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept drifting back to that man at the quarry. What if he was following me? What if he knew I'd seen him? I decided to stop at a rest area for the night, somewhere well lit and busy. Safety in numbers, right? But as I settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was around midnight when I heard the noise, a soft scraping, like someone was trying to open the door of my cab. My heart pounded as I grabbed a wrench from under the seat. I stayed quiet, listening. The noise stopped, then started again on the other side. I took a deep breath and threw the door open, wrench raised. There was no one there, just the darkness and the distant hum of the highway. I climbed out, checking around the truck, but found nothing. Just as I was about to get back in, I saw it. Another sneaker, just like the one I'd found at the quarry, lying near my rear tires. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was messing with me. I picked up the sneaker and got back in the cab, locking the doors. Sleep was out of the question. I sat there, clutching the wrench, waiting for the dawn. When morning finally came, I drove straight to the nearest police station. I handed over the sneaker and told them everything. They took my statement and promised to look into it, but I could tell they thought I was just a paranoid trucker. I didn't care. I needed to get out of there. I called Joe and told him what happened. He agreed it was best to lay low for a while, maybe change my route. I took his advice, steering clear of Sterling and its surrounding areas. A few weeks passed, and things started to feel normal again. The memory of that night began to fade, replaced by the routine of the road. But then, out of the blue, I got a call from Sheriff Harris. "Duke, we found him. The guy you saw. He's dead." "What? How? Looks like he fell off a cliff near the quarry. We found his body yesterday. But here's the thing. He had more of Emily's stuff with him. We're still searching the area. A mix of relief and confusion washed over me. So he was the one? Seems like it, but we still don't know what happened to Emily. Just thought you should know. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a strange sense of closure. The man I'd seen was dead, but Emily was still missing. It wasn't the ending I'd hoped for, but it was something. I kept driving, kept working, but the memory of that summer stayed with me. Every time I passed through a small town, I thought of Emily and her father, of the desperation in his eyes. I never saw Joe again. He retired a few years later and moved to Florida. We exchanged Christmas cards for a while, but eventually lost touch. Life went on, as it always does. But every now and then, when the road is long and the night is quiet, I think back to that hot summer day in Sterling. I think about the sneaker, the man on the ridge, and the girl who never came home. And I wonder, my name is Daryl Fletcher, and this happened to me on July 17th, 2009. I was a truck driver back then, driving long hauls across the country, a job I loved and hated in equal measure. Sure, you get to see the country, but the loneliness can be a killer. Anyway, I was on a run from Kansas City to some small town in Wyoming. I can't remember the name now. The route took me through back roads where you can go hours without seeing another soul. It was getting late, the sky turning a dark purple, and I decided to pull into a rest area I knew was about an hour ahead. One of those real, out-of-the-way places where the facilities are pretty much just a bathroom and a couple of vending machines. I've been driving since dawn and needed to stretch my legs and maybe catch a quick nap before the last leg of the trip. I pulled in, parked my rig, and noticed another truck already there, a dark blue Peterbilt. I didn't think much of it. Truckers often stopped here. I got out, lit a cigarette, and took a deep breath of the cooling air. It felt good to be out of the cab. As I walked towards the restrooms, I noticed something odd, a trail of what looked like dark, dried liquid leading from the truck to the bathroom. At first, I thought it was oil, but it was too dark and too thick. Curiosity got the better of me, so I followed the trail. It led to the restroom door, which was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The smell hit me first, a sickly sweet odor mixed with the usual restroom stink. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I saw it. A man slumped against the wall, blood everywhere. His throat had been slit, and his eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. I backed out, my heart pounding. I'd never seen anything like that before. I knew I had to call the cops, but my cell was dead, and the payphone outside was out of order. Typical. I ran back to my truck, hoping to use my CB radio to call for help. As I fumbled with the mic, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone was coming out of the other truck. The guy was tall and lean, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He moved with a casual confidence that set my nerves on edge. I pretended not to see him, focusing on getting a signal out. I managed to reach another trucker who promised to relay my call to the authorities. As I signed off, the man approached my truck. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice calm and even. "Yeah, just checking my route," I lied. He smiled, a slow, unsettling smile. "Just stretching my legs?" I nodded and watched him walk towards the bathroom. My gut told me to get out of there, but I needed to wait for the cops. I kept the engine running, ready to bolt if things got hairy. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually, I saw the flashing lights of a patrol car. I flagged them down, and 2 officers stepped out. I told them what I'd seen and they went to check the bathroom. Moments later, one of them came back, looking pale. "Stay in your truck, sir," he said. "We'll handle this." I nodded and watched as they secured the area. The guy in the cap was nowhere to be seen. I hadn't seen him leave, but he wasn't around anymore. One of the officers came back to take my statement. I told him everything, including the guy I'd seen. "Did you get a good look at him?" the officer asked. "Not really," I admitted. "Baseball cap, lean, maybe 6 foot tall. Didn't see his face clearly." The officer nodded, jotting down notes. "All right, we'll need you to stick around for a bit." I spent the next few hours talking to the cops, repeating my story. They asked if I had any enemies or if I thought someone might be targeting me. I laughed at the absurdity. "I'm just a truck driver," I said. "Who want to come after me?" They didn't have an answer, but took my information and told me to stay in touch. By the time they let me go, it was well past midnight. I decided to push through the last leg of my trip. The image of that dead man burned into my mind for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I pulled into a rest area, I scanned the shadows for that guy in the cap, but I never saw him again. The cops never contacted me either, and I never heard if they caught the guy. Life went on, but I changed, became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. I guess you could say it was a wake-up call, a reminder that no matter how routine life seems, danger can be just around the corner. And sometimes it was a friendly smile and a baseball cap. A couple of months after that night, I found myself on another long haul, this time through the deserts of New Mexico. It was the kind of drive that gave you too much time to think. My mind kept wandering back to that rest area, the blood, and the guy in the cap. I wondered if he was still out there somewhere, looking for his next victim. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but I pushed it away. I had a job to do, and I couldn't afford to get spooked. One night, I pulled into a truck stop in the middle of nowhere. It was a bigger place with a diner and a small convenience store. There were a few other trucks parked, drivers inside getting a meal or some shut-eye. I decided to grab a coffee and maybe a piece of pie, something to break the monotony of the road. As I walked into the diner, the bell above the door jingled, and a few heads turned to look at me. Truckers are a tight-knit group, always curious about a new face. I found a seat at the counter and ordered my coffee and pie. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, brought my order and struck up a conversation. "Long haul?" she asked, pouring my coffee. "Yeah," I replied. "Just passing through." She nodded, wiping down the counter. "Stay safe out there. You hear about that murder a while back? Some trucker found a guy dead at a rest stop." My heart skipped a beat. "Yeah, I heard about it," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Crazy stuff." She sighed. "World's a dangerous place. Gotta watch your back." I finished my coffee and pie, paid my bill, and headed back to my truck. As I walked across the parking lot, I noticed a figure standing by one of the trucks. He was tall, lean, and wore a baseball cap. My heart raced, but I forced myself to keep walking, hoping he wouldn't notice me. I climbed into my cab, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the lot, I glanced in my mirrors. The guy was gone. I told myself it was just a coincidence, another trucker stretching his legs. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every rest stop, every diner, I kept my eyes peeled for that guy in the cap, but he never showed up again. A year later, I decided to take a break from trucking. The road had lost its charm, and I needed a change. I took a job at a local warehouse, working regular hours and sleeping in my own bed. Life was good, but I never forgot that night. One evening, I was watching the news when a story caught my attention. Another trucker had found a body at a rest stop. The victim's throat slit, just like before. The police were looking for a suspect, described as tall, lean, and wearing a baseball cap. I turned off the TV and sat in silence, the memories flooding back. I knew it was him, the same guy who had haunted my thoughts for the past year. I wondered how many other victims were out there, how many more would fall before he was caught. Life goes on, but some things stay with you. I still drive past that rest area sometimes on my way to visit family or take a trip. I can't help but glance at the bathroom door, half expecting to see that trail of dark, dried liquid leading inside. It's a reminder that no matter how safe we think we are, danger is always lurking just out of sight, and sometimes it wears a friendly smile and a baseball cap. My name is Randall Ali, and this happened to me on October 17th, 2003. I remember the date because it was right around my birthday, and I was stuck on the road, driving my rig through the back roads of West Virginia. Being a truck driver ain't glamorous, but it pays the bills and gets me away from the city noise. I was heading towards a small town called Bramwell, carrying a load of auto parts. The plan was to drop off the goods and then hightail it back to Chicago for a long weekend. That was the plan. Anyway, I've been driving for about 8 hours straight when I decided to pull over at a rest stop. It was one of those quiet places off Highway 52. Not much more than a couple of vending machines and a bathroom. I parked my truck and got out to stretch my legs. My back was killing me, and I needed a cigarette. As I lit up and leaned against the hood, I noticed an old, beat-up Ford parked at the edge of the lot. It wasn't uncommon to see cars in these spots, but something about this one felt off. The windows were dark, and there was no sign of life. A guy in a faded denim jacket came out of the bathroom. He looked rough, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had a sort of twitchy way about him. He glanced at me, then at the Ford, and quickly looked away. He climbed into his car, started the engine, and just sat there idling. I figured he was another trucker or a drifter. You see all kinds on the road. I finished my smoke and headed to the vending machine for a soda. As I was fumbling for change, I heard the rumble of an engine and looked up. The guy in the Ford was pulling out, but not before he took one last long look at me. It wasn't friendly. I brushed it off and got back in my truck. The sun was setting, and I still had a couple of hours to go before I'd reach Bramwell. I turned on the radio, found a classic rock station, and hit the road. The highway was empty, which was a blessing and a curse. It made for easy driving, but it also made you feel isolated, like you were the only person left in the world. About an hour in, I noticed headlights in my side mirror. They were far back but closing in fast. Within minutes, the car was tailing me, way too close for comfort. I squinted at the mirror and recognized the Ford, the same beat-up piece of junk from the rest stop. What the hell does this guy want? I muttered to myself. I tried speeding up, but the Ford matched my pace. I slowed down, and he did the same. It was starting to freak me out. I honked my horn, hoping he'd get the message and back off. No dice. He just stayed there like a shadow. I decided to pull over, hoping he'd pass me. I signaled and eased onto the shoulder. Instead of passing, he pulled over too, about 50 feet behind me. This was getting ridiculous. I grabbed my flashlight and got out, intending to have a word with this lunatic. I walked toward the car, and as I got closer, I could see the guy's silhouette behind the wheel. He was just sitting there, staring at me. I stopped about 10 feet away and yelled, "Hey man, what's your problem?" He didn't respond, didn't even flinch, just kept those creepy eyes on me. I felt a chill run down my spine, but shook it off. I wasn't about to let some weirdo intimidate me. "Look, buddy, if you got something to say, say it. Otherwise, get lost." Still nothing. I took a step closer, shining my flashlight into the car. That's when I saw it. Blood. There was blood smeared on the passenger seat and dashboard. My heart started pounding. This wasn't just some random nut job. Something bad had gone down in that car. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off him. When I was a safe distance, I turned and sprinted back to my truck. I locked the doors and grabbed my cell phone. No signal, of course. I was in the middle of nowhere. I decided to make a run for it. I started the engine and floored it. The Ford's headlights flared up, and he was right on my tail again. Panic set in. I needed to find help, and fast. Bramble wasn't too far now if I could just make it there. The next 20 minutes were a blur of speed and fear. The Ford stuck to me like glue, swerving erratically. I kept honking my horn, flashing my lights, hoping someone would notice. Finally, I saw the lights of Bramble in the distance. I gunned it, my truck roaring as it pushed past the speed limit. I barreled into town, heading straight for the gas station I'd seen on my map. It was late, but the place was still open. I pulled in hard, tires screeching, and jumped out, shouting for help. The attendant, a young guy named Cody, came running out. "What's going on?" he asked. "That guy's been following me for miles." I pointed down the road, but the Ford was gone, disappeared like a ghost. Cody looked skeptical, but nodded. "Come inside. We'll call the sheriff." Inside, Cody dialed the local sheriff's office. I paced around, trying to calm down. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting the Ford to come screeching into the lot. About 10 minutes later, Sheriff Tomlinson arrived. He was an older guy, grizzled but kind-looking. "Mr. Ollie, Cody here says you've been having some trouble." I told him everything, from the rest stop to the blood in the car. He listened, nodding occasionally, but I could tell he thought I was overreacting. "All right, let's take a look," he said finally. We went back outside, but the Ford was still nowhere to be seen. The sheriff looked around, then back at me. "I'll have a patrol keep an eye out, but you might want to stay in town tonight just to be safe." Cody offered to let me park my truck behind the gas station, and even gave me a cot in the back room to crash on. I was too shaken to argue. I thanked him and tried to get some sleep, but every noise had me on edge. I kept thinking about those bloodstains and the dead look in that guy's eyes. The next morning, I decided to head out early. The sun was just coming up as I climbed into my truck, hoping to put as many miles between me and Bramble as possible. As I pulled onto the highway, I saw Sheriff Tomlinson parked at the edge of town. He waved, and I waved back, grateful for his help. I drove for hours, the road stretching endlessly before me. The events of the night before started to feel like a bad dream, something I could shake off. But then, just as I was beginning to relax, I saw it. The Ford parked at the side of the road. The same guy leaning against it, watching me. My heart raced, and I felt a surge of anger. Enough was enough. I pulled over and grabbed my tire iron. I wasn't going to let this psycho mess with me anymore. As I marched toward him, he straightened up, a faint smile playing on his lips. I stopped a few feet away, gripping the tire iron tight. "What do you want?" I demanded. He didn't answer, just stared at me with those dead eyes. I felt a surge of fear and swung the tire iron, but he dodged it easily, grabbing my arm and twisting it. Pain shot through me, and I dropped the iron. He shoved me to the ground and pulled out a knife. I scrambled back, kicking at him, but he was relentless. I managed to get to my feet and ran back to my truck, my arm throbbing. I jumped in and locked the door just as he reached me, slashing at the window with a knife. The glass held, but just barely. I fumbled for the ignition and started the truck, slamming it into gear. The tires squealed as I sped away, the guy still slashing at my window. I drove like a madman, heart pounding, until I couldn't see him anymore. I didn't stop until I reached the next town. I pulled into a police station and told them everything. They took my statement and promised to investigate, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. I stayed in that town for a couple of days, too scared to get back on the road. When I finally did, I took a different route, avoiding West Virginia altogether. The memory of that guy, his dead eyes, and the blood in his car still haunts me. I never found out who he was or what he wanted, but I know one thing. I'm never taking the back roads again. Years later, I still think about that night. I still see his face in my nightmares. Some things you just can't shake. I kept on driving trucks, but I was always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if he was out there waiting. If you ever find yourself on Highway 52 near Bramwell, be careful. You never know who you might run into. This all went down in July of 2009. I remember it clearly because it was a hot, sticky summer and I was behind the wheel of my old Freightliner, hauling a load of steel beams to a construction site in southern Missouri. I'd been driving trucks for nearly 20 years, and you'd think I'd seen it all, but what happened that day still haunts me. I was rolling down Highway 60 somewhere between Poplar Bluff and Van Buren, in the middle of nowhere. There's this stretch of road that cuts through the Mark Twain National Forest. Beautiful during the day, but desolate and eerie once the sun goes down. That evening, I was making good time, planning to stop at a truck stop near Springfield to grab a bite and catch some sleep. I had just crossed over the Black River when I noticed a beat-up old pickup on the side of the road with its hood up and a guy waving frantically. Now, truckers have an unspoken code. You help each other out. So I slowed down, pulled over, and hopped out to see what was up. The guy was maybe in his late 40s, scruffy beard, wearing a greasy baseball cap and a stained flannel shirt. He looked like he'd been working on that truck all day. "Hey man, need a hand?" I called out, walking over. "Thank God you stopped," he said, looking relieved. "I'm Ray. Truck just up and died on me. Think it's the alternator. Any chance you could give me a ride to the nearest town?" I sized him up. He seemed harmless enough, and I couldn't just leave him stranded. "Sure, hop in," I said. Nearest town's about 20 miles up the road. Ray grabbed a small duffel bag from his truck and climbed into the passenger seat. We got moving again, and he was a talker. He told me he was from Alabama, heading up to visit his sister in St. Louis. Said his truck had been giving him trouble for weeks, but he'd been hoping to make it just a bit further. We were maybe 15 minutes down the road when I noticed a car in my rearview mirror tailing us pretty close. At first, I didn't think much of it, probably just someone impatient with my speed. But then it stayed right on us, which was weird given we were the only two vehicles on the road. "You know that car?" I asked Ray, nodding towards the mirror. He turned to look, and his face went pale. "Nah, no idea who that is," he said, but his voice wavered. "Maybe it's a cop?" I joked, trying to lighten the mood. "You running from the law, Ray?" I asked. He forced a laugh. "No, nothing like that, but I could tell something was off." I kept an eye on the car, which followed us for another 10 miles, never once trying to pass, just tailing us like a shark. When we hit a stretch where the forest thickened on either side, it finally made its move. The car sped up, swerved around us, and cut us off, forcing me to brake hard. "What the hell?" I muttered. The car stopped dead in front of us, blocking the road. A tall, thin guy in a dark jacket got out and started walking towards us. He had a gun. "Stay calm, Ray," I said, my heart racing. I reached under my seat, but remembered I'd left my pistol at home. Company policy had recently cracked down on drivers carrying weapons, and I decided to play it safe. The guy reached my door and yanked it open. "Out of the truck," he ordered, pointing the gun at my face. I glanced at Ray, who looked terrified. "Look, we don't want any trouble," I said, raising my hands. "Take whatever you want. Get out of the truck," he barked. We did as we were told, climbing down slowly. Ray stumbled, almost falling. The guy motioned us to the side of the road, keeping the gun trained on us. "Empty your pockets," he said. We handed over our wallets, phones, and keys. "You can take the truck, man," I said. "Just let us go." "Shut up," he snapped. He took our stuff and tossed it into the car, then walked back to us, his eyes darting nervously. "You," he pointed at me, "get in the truck and start it." I glanced at Ray, who looked like he might pass out. "Don't try anything," the guy warned, jabbing the gun in my direction. I got back into the cab and turned the key. The engine roared to life. The guy motioned for Ray to get in the car. "You drive," he ordered. With Ray in the car and me in the truck, I had no idea what his plan was, but wasn't about to argue with the gun. I started driving again, following the car as it led the way down the highway. We drove for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. The car led us down a narrow dirt road off the highway, way deeper into the forest. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, but there was no way out. The trees closed in around us, and I knew we were heading into a trap. Finally, the car stopped in a small clearing. The guy got out, still holding the gun, and walked over to my door. "Turn it off," he said. I did. "Out," he ordered again. I climbed down, my hands trembling. He motioned for me to follow him into the woods, where Ray was already being led by another man I hadn't noticed before. This one was shorter, stocky, with a mean look in his eyes. "Move," the first guy said, prodding me with the gun. We walked for a few minutes until we reached an old, abandoned cabin. My gut twisted with fear. They pushed us inside, and I saw it was empty except for some old furniture and trash. "Sit," the second guy said, shoving Ray onto a dirty couch. I sat next to him, trying to think of a way out. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The first guy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just a little insurance," he said. "Make sure you don't go running to the cops." He turned to his partner. "Get the rope." I felt a cold sweat break out as the second guy rummaged through a bag and pulled out a length of rope. They tied us up, wrists and ankles, and left us on the couch. "Don't go anywhere," the first guy said with a laugh, and they walked out, closing the door behind them. As soon as they were gone, I started struggling against the ropes. "We have to get out of here," I whispered to Ray, who was shaking uncontrollably. "They're going to kill us, aren't they?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not if we get out first," I said, trying to sound confident. I wriggled my wrists, trying to loosen the knots. It was slow, painful work, but I could feel the rope starting to give. We heard the car start up and drive away, leaving us in the eerie silence of the forest. "Come on, damn it," I muttered, finally getting one hand free. I quickly untied the rest and turned to help Ray. "Leroy, thank you," he said, his voice cracking. "Save it for later," I said. "We need to move." We stumbled out of the cabin, looking around. The car was gone, and there was no sign of the two men. "Which way?" Ray asked, his eyes wide with fear. "We follow the road," I said. "It's our best chance." We started walking, keeping to the edge of the road, ready to dive into the trees at the first sign of trouble. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the forest. I kept my ears open, listening for any sound of the car returning. After what felt like forever, we heard the faint sound of a vehicle approaching. "Hide," I hissed, dragging Ray into the underbrush. We crouched down, holding our breath as the car drew closer. It wasn't the same car. This one was a beat-up old sedan, and the driver looked like an older man, probably a local. I stood up, waving my arms. Hey, over here. The car slowed down and stopped. The driver rolled down his window, looking at us suspiciously. What's going on here? Please, we need help, I said. We were carjacked and kidnapped. Can you call the police? The man looked us over, then nodded. Get in. I'll take you to the sheriff's office. We climbed into the back seat, exhausted and relieved. The man introduced himself as Earl, and he drove us to the nearest town, a small place called Ellington. At the sheriff's office, we gave our statements, describing the two men and what had happened. The sheriff, a grizzled old-timer named Frank, took our story seriously. We'll get a patrol out there to look for your truck and those men, he said. You two are lucky to be alive. Ray and I exchanged a look. We were alive but shaken to the core. The sheriff's deputies drove us back to the clearing where they found my truck, abandoned but otherwise untouched. There was no sign of the men or Ray's pickup. Stay alert, the sheriff said as we prepared to leave. These guys might come back. We thanked him and got back on the road, heading to the nearest truck stop. We needed to call our companies and report what had happened, but more than that, we needed to get some rest. As we drove away, I couldn't help but think about how close we'd come to dying out there. I'd always considered myself a tough guy, but this experience had shaken me. Ray was quiet, staring out the window, lost in his own thoughts. We parted ways at the truck stop, exchanging phone numbers and promises to stay in touch. I never saw him again, but I think about him every time I pass through southern Missouri. That night changed me. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the dangers out on the road. I still help people when I can, but I'm always on guard, always ready for the unexpected. And every now and then, when I'm driving through the dark stretches of highway, I remember those two men and wonder if they ever got caught, if they're still out there looking for their next victim. But I don't let it consume me. Life goes on, and so do I. After all, the road never stops calling, and there's always another load to haul, another destination to reach. As long as I'm behind the wheel, I'll keep moving forward, no matter what. That's the life of a trucker. Always moving, always watching, always surviving.